Caitlin Clark walked off the floor in Los Angeles with another win for the Indiana Fever, but that's not what everyone was staring at. Fans weren't replaying the final score. They weren't even talking about the highlights first. They were zooming in on her arms. Red marks, scratches, bruises already forming before the game had even fully ended. And suddenly, one question started spreading across social media faster than the Fever's winning streak. How much more of this can the biggest star in women's basketball actually take? Because this is no longer just about tough defense. Nobody expects Caitlin Clark to have an easy path in the WNBA. She came into the league with more hype than almost any player in basketball history. Defenses were always going to test her. Veterans were always going to play physical. But fans are starting to believe something different is happening now. Every game feels like a wrestling match. Every possession turns into bodies crashing into her before she can even set her feet. And the scary part is, it keeps escalating. What makes this story even bigger is the money attached to it. The Indiana Fever are now reportedly worth around $560 million after Clark's arrival completely transformed the franchise. Ticket sales exploded. National TV games exploded. Merchandise sales shattered expectations. Entire arenas started selling out just to watch one player shoot from the logo. Caitlin Clark didn't just become the face of the Fever. She became one of the most important business stories in all of sports. And yet, somehow, the player carrying all of that attention keeps walking off the floor looking like she just survived 4 rounds in a fight. That's where fans are starting to turn their attention toward ownership, toward the people running the franchise behind the scenes, toward Herb Simon, the billionaire owner who controls the Fever, the Pacers, and the building they play in. Because while clips of Clark getting hammered spread across the internet almost nightly, fans have noticed something else too: silence. No major statement, no public concern, no visible change in how Indiana is handling the situation. And online, that silence is starting to become part of the controversy itself. There's also growing speculation among fans that the league still hasn't figured out how to handle Caitlin Clark's impact. Some believe officials are allowing extra physicality because defenders simply can't stop her cleanly in space. Others think the WNBA underestimated how intense the attention around Clark would become once every game turned into a national event. Whatever the reason, one thing is obvious: every Fever game now feels heavier than a normal regular season matchup. And what happened in Los Angeles may have pushed those concerns to another level entirely. Because behind the stats, behind the headlines, behind the sold-out crowds and television ratings, the most valuable player in women's basketball may already be absorbing a dangerous amount of punishment only weeks into the season. And the people responsible for protecting her, fans are starting to wonder if they're doing enough at all. The final box score made it look like another huge night for Caitlin Clark: 24 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. Indiana leaves Los Angeles with a win. Casual fans scrolling through the stats probably saw the numbers and assumed she controlled the game comfortably. But anyone who actually watched it saw something completely different unfolding possession after possession. This wasn't one of those games where Clark got hot from deep and started launching logo threes. In fact, she barely had space to breathe outside the arc. She finished just 1 for 7 from three-point range, and the number itself doesn't even explain how difficult those shots were. Every time she tried to come off a screen, there was already a defender attached to her hip. Every time she hesitated for even half a second, another body closed the gap instantly. The Sparks weren't guarding her like a normal player. They were treating every touch like an emergency. That's what made the game feel so exhausting to watch. Even when Clark didn't have the ball, defenders were bumping her, grabbing at her jersey, leaning into her legs, forcing her to fight for every inch of space before the offense could even begin. Fans online started pointing out how unusual it looked compared to how most stars around the league are defended. And by the second quarter, frustration was already starting to show on Clark's face. The crazy part is, she still found a way to score efficiently.
Since the perimeter was basically sealed off all night, Clark kept attacking the rim instead. She went 8 for 10 from inside the arc because driving became the only real option left. But every drive came with contact, hard contact, arms crashing down, bodies cutting her off mid-air, defenders swiping the second she exposed the ball. It stopped looking like normal defensive pressure and started looking like survival basketball. Then the cameras caught something fans couldn't ignore. By halftime, both of Clark's arms were visibly marked up. Red streaks, fresh scratches, bruising already forming around the shoulders and forearms. Photos spread across social media almost immediately. Reddit threads began tracking screenshots in real time, with fans comparing images from earlier games and asking whether the physicality against her was getting worse every night.
And to be clear, much of that reaction is speculation from fans online. Some viewers believe Clark is simply experiencing the kind of aggressive defense superstar guards always face. Others think the league's officials are allowing defenders to play far more physically against her than they would against other stars. But regardless of where people stand, the conversation exploded after Los Angeles. You could feel Clark's frustration boiling over before halftime even ended. As the buzzer sounded, she turned toward officials, arguing about the contact she'd been taking throughout the half. Seconds later, she was hit with a technical foul while walking toward the tunnel. The moment instantly went viral because fans saw it as more than just a routine complaint to referees. To them, it looked like weeks of frustration finally spilling out in public. And here's what made the entire situation even more intense. Indiana actually won the game. Normally, controversy like this grows after a loss, but the Fever walked out with a victory, and fans still spent more time talking about Clark's bruises than the final score. That says everything about how uncomfortable this situation is starting to feel around the league. Because underneath the highlights and stat lines, a pattern is beginning to emerge. Teams appear completely willing to sacrifice aesthetics, pace, and even fouls just to keep Clark uncomfortable for 40 minutes. And right now, many fans believe it's working. But what shocked people even more than the Sparks game itself was the growing feeling that Indiana might not have a real answer for it yet. What's making this situation even more explosive is that fans are no longer blaming only opposing defenses. A growing number of people are starting to turn their frustration directly toward the Indiana Fever themselves. And online, the criticism has gotten loud. Because from the outside, many fans believe the Fever keep watching Caitlin Clark absorb hit after hit without making any visible adjustments. No workload restrictions, no major lineup changes, no public complaints about officiating, no real signs that the organization views this as an emergency. Whether that criticism is fair or not, it's becoming a major part of the conversation surrounding the team. After the Sparks game, social media completely erupted with clips of Clark getting bumped off screens and hammered on drives. Some fans defended it as playoff-style basketball arriving early. Others called it excessive. But the most common reaction was much simpler. Why does it feel like nobody is protecting the league's biggest star? That question has followed Indiana almost non-stop since the season began. There's also growing speculation online that teams around the WNBA have discovered a blueprint for slowing Clark down, not by outshooting her, not by matching her offensively, but by turning every possession into a physical battle before she can even get comfortable. Fans have pointed to the same pattern game after game, defenders crowding her full court, grabbing at her off-ball movement, forcing her into traffic, and daring officials to call everything. To be clear, those are fan interpretations and online theories, not confirmed strategies from teams themselves. But the conversation has become impossible to ignore because the visuals keep feeding it. Every nationally televised game seems to produce another viral clip of Clark getting knocked to the floor or arguing with referees about contact. And some Fever fans are starting to ask a more uncomfortable question behind all of it. Why does Indiana's offense seem to put Clark directly into the punishment over and over again? Instead of consistently creating cleaner looks for her from deep, the offense often forces her into heavy traffic late in possessions.
Defenses are trapping her higher than ever before, and when shooters aren't spacing perfectly, Clark ends up driving straight into multiple defenders, collapsing at once. That's part of why Tuesday night looked so brutal physically. The Sparks took away the three-point line, and Indiana never fully countered it. As a result, Clark kept attacking the rim because she almost had no choice. Fans online have also started debating whether the Fever are leaning too heavily on Clark too early in the season. Some believe Indiana simply can't afford to rest her because the offense changes completely when she leaves the floor. Others argue the team is so dependent on her star power that every game feels like must-see television, making it harder to reduce her workload even temporarily. Again, much of that is speculation coming from fans and commentators, but the fact those conversations are happening at all shows how tense things have become around the franchise. What makes the criticism even sharper is the pressure surrounding expectations. The Fever aren't treated like a rebuilding team anymore. Caitlin Clark changed that overnight. Every arena is sold out, every game is dissected nationally, every loss becomes headline news. And because of that attention, every bruise suddenly feels symbolic of something bigger happening across the league.
Some fans believe the WNBA is allowing Clark to be tested physically because veterans resent the attention she brought into the league. Others reject that idea completely and argue Clark simply needs to adjust to professional basketball the same way every rookie does. But somewhere in the middle of that debate sits Indiana, the franchise responsible for managing all of it. And right now, many fans believe the Fever look reactive instead of prepared. That's why frustration isn't just aimed at referees anymore. It's aimed at the coaches, the roster construction, the rotation decisions, the silence from ownership. Everything surrounding the team is being examined under a microscope because the stakes suddenly feel enormous. Because this isn't just about winning basketball games anymore. The Indiana Fever became one of the most valuable stories in sports the moment Caitlin Clark arrived. And now, with every hard foul and every visible bruise, fans are beginning to wonder if the franchise fully understands just how much is riding on her staying healthy. 2 years ago, the Indiana Fever were barely part of the national sports conversation. They had history, they had loyal fans, but financially, commercially, they weren't viewed as a powerhouse franchise. Then came Caitlin Clark stepped into the league, and the entire business of women's basketball seemed to change direction almost instantly. Now comes the number that shocked even longtime sports executives: $560 million. That's the reported valuation attached to the Indiana Fever after Clark's arrival transformed the franchise into the center of the WNBA universe. And what makes the figure even crazier is how fast it happened. Before Clark was drafted, estimates placed Indiana's value under $100 million. Then came the television explosion, the sold-out arenas, the sponsorship frenzy, the merchandise numbers nobody expected. In less than 2 seasons, the Fever reportedly multiplied their valuation several times over because one player completely altered the league's visibility. And honestly, there's never been anything quite like it in modern women's basketball. Everywhere Clark goes, the numbers follow. Road games suddenly become the most expensive tickets of the season. Arenas that normally struggled to fill seats suddenly sell out within hours. Television ratings spike whenever Indiana appears on the schedule. Entire sports shows that rarely mentioned the WNBA before are now debating Fever games almost daily. The effect has been so dramatic that some analysts believe Clark accelerated the league's mainstream growth by years. That's why the conversations around her physical treatment have become so intense, because fans aren't just watching a rookie sensation anymore. They're watching the single biggest financial engine the league has seen in years absorb nonstop punishment every night. And that's where the contradiction starts making people uncomfortable. The WNBA is benefiting massively from Caitlin Clark's popularity. Teams are profiting from her presence. Networks are profiting from her games. Sponsors are profiting from her visibility. The Fever themselves became one of the most valuable franchises in women's sports because of the attention she brought into the building.
Yet despite all of that, many fans believe the on-court protection around her still feels completely unresolved. That's why the Sparks game hit such a nerve online. People looked at those bruises and immediately connected them to the larger business story surrounding the league. Fans started asking how a player generating this much revenue could still walk off the court looking physically battered less than a month into the season. Some compared it to how other leagues historically protected transformational stars once they became the face of the sport. Others argued physical defense has always been part of basketball, and Clark simply needs to adapt. But regardless of where people stand, the attention around the issue keeps growing because the stakes feel enormous now. This isn't just about basketball anymore. The Fever became a national attraction because Caitlin Clark made them one. That $560 million valuation isn't tied to decades of dominance or multiple championships. It's tied to momentum, attention, demand, and above all else, one player whose influence changed the trajectory of an entire organization almost overnight. That's why every hard fall suddenly feels bigger than a normal basketball play. Every time Clark gets knocked to the floor, social media reacts like the league's biggest investment just took another hit. Every visible bruise becomes another viral discussion. Every argument with referees turns into national debate content within minutes. The pressure around her isn't normal superstar pressure anymore. It's financial pressure, cultural pressure, league-wide pressure. And fans are beginning to notice something else that feels strange about the whole situation. The Fever's value exploded almost immediately after Clark arrived, but many people still aren't convinced the organization evolved quickly enough around her. Because building a franchise around the biggest star in the sport requires more than ticket sales and television ratings. It requires protection, depth, planning, long-term thinking. And right now, there's growing debate about whether Indiana truly has all of that figured out yet. Which brings the spotlight directly onto the one person with the power to influence all of it behind the scenes, Herb Simon. At first, most of the frustration surrounding Caitlin Clark focused on opposing players and referees, but over the last few weeks, the spotlight has slowly shifted somewhere else entirely, towards the luxury suites, towards the front office, towards the man whose name almost never appears in headlines unless something major is happening behind the scenes, Herb Simon. And suddenly, fans are asking why he hasn't said anything at all.
Herb Simon isn't just another owner in professional basketball. He's one of the most powerful and longest-tenured owners in the sport. He owns the Indiana Fever, he owns the Indiana Pacers, he owns Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the arena at the center of this entire Caitlin Clark phenomenon. Few people inside the WNBA have more influence or organizational control than he does, which is exactly why his silence has started becoming part of the story itself. Because while clips of Clark getting knocked around spread across the internet almost nightly, there's been no major public response from ownership, no visible concern, no strong comments about officiating, no public discussion about protecting the league's most valuable attraction long-term. And online, fans are beginning to interpret that silence in very different ways. Some believe Herb Simon simply prefers operating quietly behind the scenes, the same way many veteran owners do. Others think the organization doesn't want to create public drama around officiating this early in the season. But there's also growing speculation among fans that Indiana may not want to publicly challenge the league while the Fever remain one of the WNBA's biggest television draws. Again, that's speculation from fans and commentators online, not confirmed reporting, but the conversations keep getting louder because the physical nature of Clark's games keeps escalating right alongside the Fever's visibility. What makes this even more fascinating is that owners absolutely can influence the tone surrounding situations like this, even if fans never see it directly. Owners communicate with league offices. Owners approve investments into recovery staff and player resources. Owners shape organizational philosophy behind closed doors. And when a player becomes as financially important as Caitlin Clark has become to the Fever and arguably the entire league, fans naturally start expecting visible action somewhere at the top.
Instead, what they've mostly seen is silence. And in today's sports world, silence gets interpreted almost as loudly as words. The pressure surrounding Indiana is also different now because the franchise isn't operating in obscurity anymore. Every Fever game feels national. Every controversy trends online within minutes. Every technical foul becomes debate content across sports media. Caitlin Clark didn't just bring attention to the roster, she brought attention to every decision surrounding the roster. That includes how the organization responds when she keeps getting hit. Some fans have started comparing the situation to how other leagues historically handled transformational stars once they became billion-dollar attractions. When a player changes ticket sales, ratings, sponsorships, and cultural relevance overnight, organizations usually become hyper-protective of that investment. That's why many viewers expected stronger reactions after multiple games involving heavy contact against Clark. But so far, those reactions haven't publicly arrived, and that absence is creating a strange feeling around the Fever right now. On one hand, the franchise is enjoying the most attention and financial momentum in its history. On the other hand, the conversations around Clark are becoming increasingly dominated by bruises, exhaustion, and physical punishment instead of basketball itself. That's not the image many fans expected when the league's brightest new superstar arrived. There's also another layer making the situation more uncomfortable. The Fever actually have experience managing a superstar through physical wear and tear before. This organization has dealt with protecting franchise icons during difficult seasons. They've handled workload concerns in the past. They've made cautious decisions before when they believed a player's long-term health mattered more than short-term results. Which is why some longtime Indiana fans are now asking a difficult question. If the Fever knew how to protect their stars before, why does this situation suddenly feel so different with Caitlin Clark? Long before Caitlin Clark turned Indiana into the center of the basketball universe, the Fever already had a franchise icon. Tamika Catchings wasn't just a star player in Indianapolis, she was the identity of the organization for more than a decade. She brought toughness, leadership, defense, championships, and credibility to the franchise at a time when the spotlight on the WNBA looked nothing like it does today. And when her body started breaking down late in her career, Indiana made protecting her the priority. That's why so many longtime Fever fans keep bringing up the 2015 season right now. By that point, Catchings had already played through years of physical wear and tear. Reports around the team regularly mentioned lingering back problems and the mileage that came from carrying the franchise for so long. Indiana understood exactly what was happening. They knew their championship hopes depended on having her healthy when the games mattered most. So, instead of squeezing every possible regular season minute out of their superstar, the organization adjusted everything around protecting her body. Her minutes dropped significantly compared to earlier years. The coaching staff became more careful about workload. Rest and recovery became central parts of the conversation. Indiana essentially accepted that preserving their franchise cornerstone mattered more than chasing every regular season win in June and July.
And it worked. By playoff time, Catchings looked fresher physically, and the Fever made another deep postseason run. Indiana reached the WNBA Finals that season because the organization chose long-term protection over short-term exhaustion. They recognize the reality every smart franchise eventually faces. When one player means everything to the team, protecting that player becomes part of protecting the franchise itself. That's why the comparisons to Caitlin Clark are becoming impossible to ignore. Because many fans look at Clark's current workload and see almost the opposite approach unfolding in real time. Instead of limiting physical punishment, Clark is constantly attacking through contact. Instead of carefully easing pressure, every Fever game seems to revolve entirely around her creation, her scoring, and her ability to survive relentless defensive attention. The offense rarely slows down around her. The spotlight never dims.
And unlike the later years of the Catchings era, Indiana doesn't appear to have the kind of deep roster that allows Clark extended stretches off the floor without the entire offense collapsing. That contrast is exactly why online discussions have become so intense. Fans keep asking how the same franchise that once carefully managed a veteran superstar now appears comfortable pushing its newest superstar through one of the most physically demanding stretches in the league. Some believe the Fever simply don't have enough roster flexibility to reduce Clark's workload right now. Others think the organization feels pressure to keep its biggest attraction on the court as much as possible because of the unprecedented attention surrounding every game. And again, much of that remains speculation from fans and commentators, but the debate keeps growing because the visual evidence keeps fueling it. The bruises, the hard falls, the frustration with officials, the nonstop defensive pressure. It all creates the impression that Indiana is reacting to the situation instead of controlling it. What also makes this story fascinating is Stephanie White's connection to both eras. Stephanie understands exactly what the Fever did with Catchings because she lived through it herself. She played alongside Catchings earlier in her career and later coached during that 2015 finals run. She saw firsthand what constant physical punishment can do to a superstar's body over time, which is why some fans are surprised the current approach around Clark looks so aggressive by comparison. Of course, the situations aren't identical. Catchings was a veteran near the end of her career. Clark is a young superstar at the very beginning of hers. But in some ways, that's exactly why the concern feels even bigger now. Fans aren't worried about preserving the final years of a legend. They're worried about protecting the player many believe the future of the league is being built around. And there's another uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all of this. The Fever may not actually have the roster depth needed to protect Clark the way they once protected Catchings. Because once you look at how Indiana built this team financially, the entire situation starts making a lot more sense. The deeper people look into Indiana's situation, the more one uncomfortable reality keeps appearing underneath everything else. Caitlin Clark may not just be carrying the spotlight, she may be carrying too much of the actual basketball burden too. Because once you strip away the sold-out crowds and national attention, the Fever still have a roster problem that fans are becoming increasingly nervous about admitting out loud. This team is top-heavy. Indiana invested heavily in its core stars, and on paper, that sounds exactly like what a contender should do. Aaliyah Boston became one of the franchise's centerpieces. Kelsey Mitchell remained a major scoring weapon. Clark arrived as the transformational superstar who could elevate everything around them. The problem is what happens after those names. The depth starts getting thin fast. That's where many fans believe the real danger surrounding Clark begins. When a roster lacks reliable second-unit scoring, a coaching staff becomes terrified of taking its superstar off the floor for too long. Every minute suddenly matters. Every offensive possession feels dependent on the same player creating something. And for Indiana, that player is almost always Caitlin Clark. Fans have started noticing how dramatically the offense changes whenever she sits. The pace slows, ball movement stalls, shot creation becomes harder, defenses relax. That pressure creates a situation where Clark not only has to produce constantly, but often has to absorb the physical punishment that comes with carrying the offense every single night. And that's exhausting even for veteran superstars. Some fans online have also pointed out another issue they believe Indiana still hasn't fully solved: the lack of a true physical veteran presence on the perimeter. Not necessarily an enforcer in the old-school sense, but someone who can absorb defensive attention, settle the offense, and take pressure off Clark when games become overly physical. Right now, many viewers feel opponents can load almost everything towards Clark without fearing consistent secondary punishment. Again, those are fan observations and basketball debates happening online, not official conclusions from the organization itself. But the discussion keeps growing because the same patterns keep appearing game after game. Clark gets pressured full court, defenders trap her high. The offense becomes dependent on her escape passes and difficult reads. Then, when possessions break down late in the shot clock, she ends up attacking crowded lanes and taking more contact, over and over again. And the scheduling hasn't helped either. The Fever have already gone through stretches where games arrive rapidly with little recovery time between physical matchups. Fans keep pointing to the cumulative effect of all of it, the bruises, the hard drives, the heavy minutes, the emotional pressure, the constant spotlight. Individually, each thing may seem manageable. Together, they start creating concern about how sustainable this really is across an entire season. What makes the situation even trickier is that Indiana can't simply rest Clark the way some fans suggest online. The reality is much more complicated. The Fever are trying to win now. Expectations exploded the moment Clark entered the league. National television schedules revolve around her. Ticket demand revolves around her. And competitively, Indiana still looks like a team learning how to balance star power with long-term roster construction. That balance is incredibly difficult, especially when every opponent treats your games like the biggest event on their calendar. There's also growing speculation among fans that the Fever may have underestimated just how physically exhausting this style of defense against Clark would become over time. Some analysts believe teams would eventually adjust schematically against her shooting range, but what many viewers think they're seeing instead is something far more aggressive, opponents deciding to wear her down possession by possession before the offense can even develop. And because Indiana lacks the kind of deep bench that allows long stretches without Clark orchestrating everything, she keeps going right back into the fire. That's why the frustration surrounding the roster has become so emotional online. Fans aren't just criticizing missed rotations or bad possessions anymore. They're looking at the bigger picture. They're asking whether the Fever built enough protection around the most important player in women's basketball before throwing her into one of the most demanding spotlights the sport has ever seen. Because if Clark keeps absorbing this level of punishment night after night, the fear isn't just about losing regular season games anymore. The fear is about something much bigger happening before the league fully realizes how fragile this entire moment could actually be. At this point, the conversation around Caitlin Clark has moved far beyond normal rookie growing pains. What started as debates about physical defense and officiating is slowly turning into something much larger, a growing fear that the league may be pushing its biggest attraction into an unsustainable situation before anyone fully understands the long-term consequences. And that fear is no longer limited to Fever fans. Across sports media, podcasts, social platforms, and basketball circles, more people are starting to ask the same question. What happens if this pace of physical punishment continues for an entire season? Because the reality is brutal. Clark isn't just playing basketball right now. She's carrying expectations the WNBA has never really experienced at this scale before. Every arena treats her arrival like an event. Every opponent raises their intensity. Every television broadcast becomes a national discussion within minutes. And somewhere inside all of that pressure sits a 22-year-old guard taking hits almost every possession. That's why the tone around her games has started feeling different lately. Fans aren't only reacting to wins and losses anymore. They're watching her body language, watching how slowly she gets up after contact, watching the frustration with officials build game after game, watching the visible marks left behind after physical nights. The basketball itself almost feels secondary sometimes because the larger concern keeps hanging over everything else. How much can one player realistically absorb before something finally gives? And to be clear, nobody is claiming an injury is inevitable. But there's growing speculation among fans and commentators that the league may have underestimated how extreme defensive attention toward Clark would become once teams realized how dangerous she is offensively. Some expected opponents to focus mainly on trapping her shooting range. Instead, many viewers believe games have evolved into attempts to wear her down physically from the opening possession onward. That distinction matters because constant physical basketball affects more than scoring efficiency. It affects energy, recovery, confidence, mental fatigue, even decision-making late in games. And when a player is also carrying historic media attention every night, the emotional exhaustion can become just as heavy as the physical punishment. Some longtime basketball fans have started comparing this moment to what other leagues faced when generational stars first exploded onto the scene. There's always tension between allowing competitive physicality and protecting the players who elevate the sport commercially. Too much protection and fans complain about favoritism. Too little and the league risks damaging the very stars driving its growth. Right now, many people think the WNBA is still trying to figure out where that balance should be with Caitlin Clark, and that uncertainty is fueling even more debate online.
Some fans argue Clark simply needs time to adjust physically to professional basketball, just like countless stars before her. Others believe the current level of contact has crossed into something excessive because of the nonstop attention surrounding her. There are even rumors circulating online suggesting some teams view shutting Clark down physically as a statement opportunity because of how much media coverage follows every Fever game. Again, those rumors remain speculation from fans and internet discussions, not verified fact. But the reason they spread so quickly is because the visual evidence keeps feeding the narrative. The hard fouls, the grabbing, the frustration, the bruises. Every nationally televised game seems to produce another clip that restarts the entire conversation all over again. And underneath all of it sits the fear nobody inside the league wants to say publicly. What if the WNBA's biggest growth era becomes too dependent on one player carrying too much too fast? Because Caitlin Clark is no longer just a star rookie. She's become the centerpiece of television strategy, ticket demand, sponsorship momentum, and national attention across the league. That level of importance changes everything. Suddenly, every collision looks riskier, every heavy minute load feels more dangerous, and every conversation about officiating becomes bigger than basketball itself. And the scary part is, this entire situation still feels like it's escalating rather than calming down. Defenses aren't backing off, the schedule isn't slowing down, the spotlight keeps getting brighter, and Caitlin Clark continues to play through all of it while the debate surrounding her treatment grows louder every single week. Which is why the final question hanging over Indiana right now feels so enormous. If everyone understands how valuable Caitlin Clark has become to the future of the league, who's ultimately responsible for making sure this story doesn't go too far before somebody finally steps in? Caitlin Clark changed everything the moment she entered the WNBA. That's no longer a debate. The numbers proved it, the sold-out arenas proved it, the television ratings proved it. The Indiana Fever went from a struggling franchise fighting for relevance to one of the biggest stories in sports almost overnight because one player walked through the door and brought the spotlight with her. But now that same spotlight is revealing something the league may not have been fully prepared for: the physical toll. Every game feels heavier now. Every hard foul becomes a national conversation. Every visible bruise spreads across social media within minutes. And with every passing week, it feels like the attention surrounding Caitlin Clark's treatment is growing just as fast as the attention surrounding her talent. That's why this situation feels bigger than basketball to so many fans. Because people aren't only watching points and assists anymore, they're watching how the league responds when its most valuable attraction keeps taking punishment night after night. They're watching how the Fever handle the pressure of building an entire franchise around one player while also trying to win immediately. And they're watching whether the people with the most power behind the scenes are willing to step in before the situation escalates even further. Right now, there are still more questions than answers.
Will officials eventually call these games differently? Will Indiana adjust Clark's workload as the season wears on? Will the roster around her improve enough to ease the pressure she's carrying offensively? Or will this level of physical basketball simply become the new normal every time she steps on the floor? Nobody fully knows yet, and that uncertainty is exactly why the conversation has become so emotional across the league. Some fans believe Clark is simply experiencing the harsh reality every superstar eventually faces. Others think the WNBA is risking too much by allowing its biggest draw to absorb this much contact so early in her career. There are strong opinions on both sides, and the debate probably isn't going away anytime soon. But one thing is impossible to deny now. Caitlin Clark became the center of the WNBA's growth story faster than almost anyone expected. The Fever's valuation exploded, national attention exploded, the league's visibility exploded. One player accelerated everything, which is why the image that keeps sticking with fans feels so important. Not the logo threes, not the sold-out crowds, not even the wins. It's Caitlin Clark walking off the floor with red marks covering her arms while the entire basketball world argues over whether anyone is doing enough to protect the player carrying this moment on her shoulders. And maybe that's the real pressure surrounding Indiana now. Not just winning games, not just building a contender, but figuring out how to protect the player who changed the future of the franchise before the weight of all this attention starts costing more than anybody expected. Because if Caitlin Clark truly became the engine driving the WNBA into a new era, then the biggest question hanging over the league may be the simplest one of all. Who's responsible for protecting the future while it's happening in real time? Let me know what you think in the comments.